There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with another In Other Words, which is an occasional series where I talk about vocabulary, grammatical patterns, idioms that I encounter in my reading. I occasionally want to remind you that I am not holding myself up as any kind of expert in these matters, but I do love doing deep dives in etymological dictionaries on the internet and am a vocabulary geek. This is another cut and paste. There is an excess of footage from the last batch of words that I shared with you. I think 25 minutes is about the maximum that I have patience for the editing process, because I do ramble on and pause and look more words up on Google and this and that, and the editing is pretty challenging. And I think 25 minutes, a 25-minute video of this nature especially is just about long enough. So you're going to get the rest of the vocabulary from Rachel Ferguson's The Brontes Went to Woolworths, which I filmed some weeks ago, so I'll be wearing different clothes and maybe have a different hairstyle. And then I hope I can fit in all of the vocabulary from Sarah Moss's Ghost Wall at the tail end of this. If not, the tail end of the Ghost Wall vocabulary will be in a forthcoming video. Let's go. Okay, this one was fun. A cami-knicker. A cami-knicker. Do you know what that is? This is a portmanteau word, compound of camisole and knicker. So it's a garment which covers the torso and crotch in one garment. Ooh, that sounds hot. Similar to a one-piece swimsuit or bodysuit, but usually looser and more sheer. Ooh, hoo, hoo, hoo. You put it on by stepping into the leg holes and pulling the garment up to cover the torso. It may cover the whole of the torso or partial. Oh my god, this is hot. Anyway, here's some pictures. Somebody in the book was wearing a cami-knicker. The next one is table turning, and this was a central aspect of the plot. This endearingly weird family in the novel, they take a trip to Bronte country in the UK, and then they do a table turning. Do you know what a table turning is? Not the idiom, the tables are turned. This is something quite different. It's also called table tapping, table tipping, or table tilting. It's a type of seance, so it's kind of the old-fashioned British version of the Ouija board. People sit around a table, put their hands on it, and wait for rotations. The table apparently is supposed to serve as a means of communicating with the spirits. The alphabet would be slowly called over, and the table would tilt at the appropriate letter. So very much like the Ouija board. Breaking news, scientists and skeptics consider this to be completely fake. And there is an episode of table turning in the novel. Okay, this one fascinated me. I found an occurrence of suspicion, which is by all accounts a noun, used as a verb in the past tense. Suspicioned. The phrase is, "Yet I have always suspicioned I could love it at forbidden time." I was like, huh? So, the Grammarphobia blog, I'll put a link to this in the show notes, talks about this. It is defined as a verb in the OED, but it's described as being informal, dialectical, colloquial, or substandard. So that's why we haven't heard of it. Because the verb is suspect, right? To have a suspicion, to suspect, but not to suspicion. It dates back to the early 1600s and has been used in American English, 19th century British English, but is considered regional or very old-fashioned. Usually transitive, but sometimes intransitive. Here it's being used transitive. Transitive means it has an object. Intransitive means no object. All of these words that are suspicion or suspect go back to Latin suspicere, I don't know how you pronounce it, which is classical Latin for to look up to. Suspicere evolved metaphorically along two lines. One, to look up to and admire, and that has died out. And the other is to look at secretly. In other words, to look at distrustfully, and that has passed into English. So to suspect someone of being up to no good. That's very interesting. I found a verb I had never heard of. It's reft. That's the past. The present tense is reave. So here it is. It means to carry out raids in order to plunder. That'd be useful, hey? Reaving and stealing, or to rob someone of something by force. In fact, reave goes back to the Proto-Indo-European root runp. Here it is, which means to break. So here's a bunch of words that derive from that root. Rupture, abrupt, disrupt, all of those words. Rob, corrupt. They all go back to breaking something. Hey, well, while I was editing this, I thought there must be some connection between reave and reft and words that are slightly more modern, bereave and bereft. And in fact, they do go back to the same German words, but the Proto-Indo-European root is a little bit different. But they are definitely cousins because they go back to the meaning of reave and bereave as to be deprived of or to be robbed of something, which eventually morphed into the somewhat modern nuances related to grief. How's that? Okay, this one's fun. A masher. The girls and women in this novel say, we pretend he, it doesn't matter who he is, we pretend he is a masher left over from the Empire Promenade who is trying to seduce Katrine. So masher. To put it in a nutshell, masher means the same as dandy. And dandy is a man unduly concerned with looking stylish and fashionable like me. In North American English, masher meant, I think it's old-fashioned, meant a man who makes unwelcome sexual advances to women. The less said about that recently, the better, hey? But masher. In the novel, a masher who's trying to seduce Katrine, this is a British novel, 1931, assuming it doesn't have that really negative North American meaning, but that's an open question. It goes back to the late 19th century. It's probably derived from the slang word mash, which meant to attract sexually, to be infatuated, and they think that goes back to Romani, mashavera, which meant allure. I guess the sexual, flirtatious, seductive meaning was always there, because it goes back to 1500. The verb mash meant a would-be lady killer, one whose dress or manners are such as to impress strongly the fancy of susceptible young women. So it was always, the seduction is built into the word from the get-go. But by around 1875 in American English, it took a decidedly negative meaning, somebody who came on too strong. Crushing somebody else's emotions. So this is where we bring crush in, because mash and crush came to mean the same thing in the late 19th century. I think particularly in American English. So crush goes back to the mid-14th century. That's obviously not in America. That's in the UK, which meant smash, shatter, break into fragments or small pieces, force down, and bruise by heavy weight, or overpower, subdue. Gnash your teeth. The noun by the late 16th century meant a violent collision or rushing together, a crush of people on the Tokyo trains. The idea of somebody being infatuated with another person is first recorded in 1884 in American slang, and you can see how all of those flow from the original meaning of crush, and that mash and smash are all tied up there etymologically. And getting back to mash, how could I have forgotten to address the primary, most delicious meaning thereof? Katrine, we just met her in the earlier quote. She grinned at a certain point in the novel and said, "Well, I'm blithered." Blither, the verb, means to talk in a long-winded, nonsensical way. A blithering idiot. That's a phrase that's lodged in my head. As a noun, it means the same, long-winded talk with no real substance. no comments from the peanut gallery. And it relates to blather. It's a variant form of blather. So blather is blah, 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 blah. I think blah comes from blather. I don't know that. But blather goes back to late Middle English. As a verb, it was originally from Scotch and Northern English dialects, from an Old Norse word brathra, which meant to talk nonsense. And it goes back to a Proto-Germanic root, blodram, which meant something inflated, with which we also get the word bladder. Bladder goes back to the root, which I won't even try to pronounce. Here it is, bhle, which meant to blow. So you can think of inflating something by blowing on it. Balloon must come from there too. Here's all the words that come, and they don't list balloon, but I think balloon should be in this list, don't you? I did further research later on, and in fact there is a strong etymological connection. Bladder, blase, blast, blather, blaze, blow, conflate, deflate, flatulent, flavor, inflate, inflation, souffle. All of those go back to that Proto-Indo-European root, and you can connect bladder, blather, and blither. But we need to go back to that confusing sentence where she said, I am blithered. I guess it means I am reduced to being a blithering idiot. Like, I'm so surprised that I'm talking nonsense. The last one is one I could find almost nothing about, so I need your help. Runnion. Somebody says, I think Amy's a runnion, and then they're all talking about runnion. What does it mean? And they're saying it's found in Shakespeare. Well, I guess it's found in Shakespeare, but boy, it's not found very much on the internet. It's a British English noun, very derogatory, which means a woman or a penis. So I think Emily's a runnion. I guess would be the same as saying I think Emily's a slut or something. I don't think it means that she's a penis, but anybody else? Boy, Google runnion. I didn't find very much. Apparently it's in Shakespeare, but it's not found very much online. So now let's continue on. I'm back in my flowery shirt, the same one from the intro, and I want to talk about some great words I found in Ghostwall by Sarah Moss, a 2018 novel. It was nominated for a bunch of prizes, undeservedly so, I would opine, but I'm in a distinct minority about that. There's some lovely writing here and some great vocabulary. I thought it pretty much stunk as a novel, but that's not what we're here to discuss. We're here to discuss the great words, a lot of them Northern English dialectical words, so I had a good time looking those up. The first one is summat, which is a variant of somewhat or something. I didn't find that this was confined to Northern English dialects, but it does occur in Northern England and maybe other dialects from the 18th century. There's something wrong with this machine. Something wrong. Most authoritative pronouncements I found about this said that it truly means somewhat, but that erroneously, whatever that means when you're talking about word history, it came to mean something. It occurs in George Eliot's Adam Bede, with the somewhat meaning, it's somewhat like to see such a man as that in the desk of a Sunday. Some people think it's Scottish, and other linguists say no, it's not Scottish, but it is Yorkshire English, so people are a little confused about where it comes from. But basically, perhaps more modernly, as in Ghostwall, it means something. Very common to hear it in Manchester, apparently. I saw one amateur expert say that it comes from the Old English word ought, which is the opposite of not. Ought meaning something, not meaning nothing. It was all for naught, right? An ought, summat. But I didn't find any definitive proof. The next word is definitely a Northern English variant, and that is anyroad, meaning anyway. And I'll be brief here because I found some interesting conjecture that some of it had the weight of an actual linguistic research, that if you think about it, way and road can have the same meaning. Is this the way? Is this the road? Way is a more general noun, but one of the meanings of way is the path or the road. And so any road in Northern English is another way to say anyway. So if you want to just change the subject, we're done talking about Sean the Book Maniac and we want to talk about Simon Savage. So any road, let's move on. Interesting. The next one is footle. It's a verb that means to engage in fruitless activity or mess about. To fuck around, basically, because the original meaning in French, which is how it entered English in the 16th century, the old French verb foughty means to copulate with. So, yeah, quit screwing around, quit dicking around, quit fucking around. Here's the antiquated version of that. Footle. And they think that the old French verb foughty goes back to the Latin future, I don't know how to pronounce that. Here, I'll put those ones up. They think that one, and this is all very speculative, nobody's quite nailed it down, goes back to the Proto-Indo-European root bhau, here it is, which means to strike. That's one theory, and so that root is interesting. So here are some words that derive from that root. Much more definitively, a butt, baste a chicken, beat, beetle, boutonniere, butt, buttocks, button, buttress, confute, halibut, refute. But the other theory about footle thinks it comes from an English dialect word, foughty. The earliest recorded instance of foughty, which means musty or moldy, is 1600, and that comes from Dutch and Danish, and is etymologically linked to fog. I can't quite see how that gets into footle myself, but there it is. Next is a milecastle, and this one, the meaning might not be apparent to you, but the etymology or the origin of it is very clear. A milecastle is a small fort, or some people call it a fortlet, really a fortlet, a rectangular fortification built during the period of the Roman Empire. And so if you've read Ghostwall, you know that there's a lot about the Iron Age, the archaeological and political, harkening back to the Iron Age of Britain, including obviously the Roman occupation. So milecastles were placed at intervals of approximately 1 Roman mile, hence mile castle, along several major frontiers. For example, Hadrian's Wall, here's a picture, in Great Britain, known as Britannia in the Roman period. And that's really all you need to know about the word origin, but I had never heard of a milecastle, and it figures, or is referred to in the course of this novel. The next one is ginnel, a Northern English word that means a narrow passageway between buildings, an alley, especially common in Yorkshire and Lancashire, and in those places especially has the nuance of a narrow passageway or alley between terraced houses. I have some fabulous pictures to show you. Comes from the early 17th century, and they think it might come from the French word gennel, meaning channel. Interesting, I found some other vocabulary that describes basically the same thing. In Barnsley in South Yorkshire, the word is snicket. Is that where we get lemony snicket? I didn't check that. You guys will tell me. But a snicket is a path typically between fences or walls in an open space or field, or between gardens. So it's not quite the same. But a ginnel is, as I said, a gap between houses or between buildings. In Sheffield, also in Yorkshire, these words are not used. Instead, the word is gennel. So here's the spelling of gennel, and it's pronounced with the G sound, not the G sound. Gennel encompasses both snicket and ginnel. Oh my. The next one is Marshlight. And again, there's no etymological mystery here, but it means, when I looked it up, it means a will-of-the-wisp. And I have heard that phrase all my life, and I had no idea what it was until tonight. So will-o'-the-wisp is an atmospheric ghost light seen by travelers at night, especially over bogs, swamps, or marshes. I had no idea. So in English folk belief or English folklore and much of European folklore, it's called by names such as a jack-o'-lantern. That was the original meaning of jack-o'-lantern. Friar's lantern, hinky-punk, or hobby lantern. In literature, a will-o'-the-wisp, I'm putting pictures up here, it has a metaphorical meaning, alluding to a hope or goal that leads one on but is impossible to reach. Sounds like my sex life in the 90s. The Wikipedia page said there's a famous one in Saskatchewan, my home province in Canada, the St. Louis Light. So the St. Louis Light is a ghost train, the decapitated conductor, and many people see that light at night on the train tracks. Really? It's in northern Saskatchewan. I've never heard of St. Louis, Saskatchewan. Even though it's twice the size of my hometown, it has 450 people. It's more than twice the size of my hometown. So, Marshlight is not etymologically interesting, but will-o'-the-wisp. Wisp was a bundle of sticks or paper, sometimes used as a torch, and then the male Christian name Will, so will-o'-the-wisp. The light, right? The eerie light at night. The next word is mithering. In the novel, the mother, who's a piece of work and a fairly unforgettable character in the novel, says to the daughter, the protagonist, there's enough here already mithering him being your father. So don't bother your father. Mither, again, Northern English word, means to make a fuss, to moan, or to irritate. It goes back to the late 17th century, and people are not sure where it came from, except that they think there might be some linguistic link with Welsh. There's a Welsh verb, which I will try to pronounce, but modrod, I'll put it here, that means to worry or bother. Middens. Middens is a archaeological term that means old dung heaps, old dumps for domestic waste, which when archaeologists and paleontologists are excited, they are looking for the animal bone, human excrement, botanical material, mollusk shells, and a bunch of other things, other kinds of artifacts and ecofacts. There's a few words here I don't know. So that's interesting. Middens. And there's a professor in here whose character just goes off the rails in a way that just made me want to throw up. It was so stupid. But he is talking about the middens. He says the middens don't offer much of a clue about cooking methods. You can do your archaeological tests on the old dung heaps, but they aren't going to tell you much about how they cooked. It goes back to a late Middle English word, midding, that they have traced back to Scandinavian and relates to an equivalent Danish word that means mock heap. The protagonist and one of the other young women on this silly adventure in Ghostwall are sneaking off to the 7-Eleven or something, and one of them says to the other, "We'll look right prats if anyone sees us." Right prats. So the word is prats. Prat is a British English word, informal slang, that means an incompetent or stupid person, an idiot. So we'll look right prats means we'll look downright silly or stupid. And the original meaning was a person's buttocks. Going back to the mid-16th century, of unknown origin, darn it all. In American criminal slang, it meant hip pocket. Well, that connects to buttocks, right? By the late 60s, in British slang, it came to mean a contemptible person, but I believe in this novel it's just meant to be an incompetent or stupid person. But it is related to a word that I have heard many times in my life. I had no idea what it meant. Pratfall means to fall on your ass. It comes from prat, meaning buttock, and fall. And that's more common in North American slang. So somehow the prat thing really got into American English. And pratfall, more figuratively, has come to mean any kind of embarrassing failure or mistake. So I've certainly made lots of those. Moving on, clarted. The burdocks are a daisy-like flower. The burdocks were clarted with clayey soil. Clayey meaning clay-like. The burdocks were clarted with clayey soil. Clart, as a verb, means to be daubed or smeared, especially with mud or dirt. And then the noun is a clot of mud, or just plain mud, or someone who's slovenly. They haven't traced it back much further than in Middle English as part of the verb by clarten, which meant to cover or smear with dirt, and nobody's, from what I could find, nobody's been able to trace it back further. But clart, to be clarted. Het up, it has nothing to do with being a butch straight guy, which it could. The men came back late in this, where the story was getting really stupid at this point. The men came back to the ghost wall camp. They were a little excited and het up. But het up means agitated. It's a shortened form of heated, and has been used as a shortened form of heated since the 14th century. So the men came back and they were all agitated. It has been used in American English as early as the 1880s to literally mean to heat food up, but it's usually, I think, meant as agitated in British English. So that's interesting. Let me say that again. In British English, it seems to have always been used as agitated, but there is this one occurrence, at least, in a late 19th century American English of actually heating food up. Clemmed. This is dialectical English, which means to be hungry or to be starving. So those same men in this story that had completely gone off the rails by this point, the men arrived back at the camp, het up and clemmed. They were ravenously hungry. They were famished. Yeah, I guess northern dialect from the Middle English clemmen, meaning to pinch. So pinched with hunger. You did find this word showing up in Coronation Street, and it's kind of had a resurgence since 2000 among young'uns. Clemped dief, meaning dying of hunger. Now this is really interesting, and I couldn't find very much, so I hope some of you will weigh in and enlighten me. I did find some authoritative sounding but very brief mention of it being related to the German verb verklemmen and the Yiddish verklem, and then the Old English beklemmen. Now, verklemmen is where we get verklempt, which is a Yiddish word that I use a lot. I have no ethnic right to use it, but I love it. It's entered North American culture through TV, and I often say when I want to say that I'm feeling teary or I'm almost in tears, I'm all verklempt. And that, there's speculation, is related to clem. So I want to know more about that. I couldn't find anything. Please help me out, because that's fascinating. And the last word for today is testudo, which is a military formation dating back to ancient Roman times. The noun means a wheeled screen with an arched roof used to protect besieging troops, but also that formation. And so here's some pictures of what that looked like. Really, riot police use kind of a similar thing, don't you think? And they think that that is etymologically linked to the Latin root is testa, meaning shell, and they think that not turtle, but tortoise also goes back to that same root testa, but I couldn't get it any further back than Latin, but that's pretty interesting. All right, that's what I got. Thanks for watching.